All right, so we're diving deep into the story of Moses today.
Moses.
Yeah, parting the Red Sea, the Ten Commandments, the whole bit.
Right, one of the biggest names.
We've got some excerpts here.
Okay.
Looks like it's from some sort of encyclopedia entry about him.
Gotcha.
And let me tell you, this guy's life, talk about twists and turns.
Well, what's fascinating to me is that he's not just a figure you read about in religious texts.
Oh, yeah.
He's a historical figure, too.
Right.
And his life is still studied and debated by scholars today.
It's pretty amazing when you think about it. I mean, it all starts with a baby in a basket floating down the Nile.
The classic image.
I know, right? We've all heard the story.
Huh?
But it's crazy to think that Moses was a Hebrew,
Right.
born when his people were, slaves in Egypt.
Totally.
And he ends up being adopted by the Pharaoh's daughter.
Wow. Yeah.
Like,
What are the chances?
it makes you think about how that upbringing shaped him.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, imagine having all the privileges of royalty,
Yeah.
knowing your people are suffering under the rule of the very family raising you.
Right.
And there's this detail that really stands out to me.
Mm.
Moses was actually nursed by his own mother.
Oh, wow.
She was hired as his nanny, so he knew his true heritage.
That's a powerful connection.
It is, yeah.
Almost like a real-life nature versus nurture experiment.
Absolutely.
So Moses grows up, and you can see this conflict playing out. The encyclopedia talks about an incident where Moses sees this Egyptian taskmaster brutally beating a Hebrew slave.
Oh, wow.
And Moses, well, he doesn't just stand by.
Right.
He steps in and kills the Egyptian.
That's a bold move.
I know, right? Not exactly your typical response, even back then.
No, not at all.
So what do you make of that?
Well, I think it shows a deep sense of empathy and justice in Moses.
Mm-hmm.
He risked his own life, his whole privileged position,
Yeah.
to defend someone who was being treated unjustly.
Makes
It's like he was foreshadowing his future role.
as a defender of the oppressed.
Exactly.
But of course there are consequences.
Right.
Moses has to run from Egypt,
Yeah.
ends up in Midian, becomes a shepherd, gets married,
Okay.
settles down, quiet life,
It sounds peaceful.
Almost like he was running from his destiny
And then
until...
the burning bush.
Oh yeah, the burning bush.
Doesn't happen every day.
No, not really, even in the ancient world.
That's when everything changes for him.
That's the turning point.
That's where he receives his call,
from Yahweh
the God of his ancestors,
to go back to Egypt.
and free the Hebrews.
And on top of all that,
Yeah.
the source mentions that Moses had a speech impediment.
Oh, wow.
Can you imagine?
It makes you wonder how he felt about leading a whole nation
Out of bondage.
when he wasn't even sure about his own voice.
That's gotta be tough.
Yeah, and that's where Aaron steps in.
His brother.
Right. He becomes his spokesperson.
Talk about a power duo. It shows how important delegation is, right?
Absolutely. Even way back then.
Recognizing each other's strengths.
It's about knowing your limitations.
Yeah.
And finding the people who can help you achieve a shared goal.
But even with Aaron by his side, they still had to face the Pharaoh.
Right.
I mean, think about it. We're talking about Ramses II here.
Ramses II, yeah.
This guy was not messing around.
Powerful, intimidating.
So how do you think Moses, with his speech impediment, stood up to someone like that?
It's a good question.
Right.
I think it all comes down to belief, conviction. The sources say that at first Moses didn't want this mission.
He was hesitant.
He doubted himself.
Yeah.
But his faith in Yahweh gave him the strength
To confront the Pharaoh.
to confront the Pharaoh.
And confront him. He did.
Yeah,
Moses demanded that the Pharaoh release the Hebrews,
of course.
but Ramses wasn't exactly thrilled about the idea.
No surprise there.
It's like this epic standoff.
Right.
And then we get to the plagues.
The plagues, yeah.
Whether you take them literally or metaphorically, it's a serious escalation.
Between Moses and the Pharaoh.
It's this clash between change.
And resistance to change.
We see this all the time, right?
All throughout history.
Social movements, revolutions, even personal growth.
It's a constant struggle.
And then, of course, the grand finale.
The Exodus.
The big escape.
One of the most famous stories.
I mean, there's debate about whether it was peaceful
Right.
or if they basically just ran for it.
Either way.
They end up at the Sea of Reeds with the Egyptian army on their tail.
Oh, yeah.
And here's where things get really interesting.
Okay.
Because turns out this sea might not have been the Red Sea like we picture it today.
Oh.
It was probably a shallower papyrus lake.
Really?
Yeah.
Huh, so the geography might be different.
But the story's the same.
The themes are universal divine
Amazing.
intervention.
It's this powerful image of hope and deliverance,
It still inspires people today.
To keep going.
To have faith.
Even when things seem impossible.
Exactly. Yeah, it really is a huge turning point for them.
But freedom isn't always easy, is it?
No, not at all.
I mean, they've just escaped a lifetime of slavery.
Right.
They're wandering in the desert, no map, no food trucks.
I can't even imagine.
It's no wonder the sources describe this period as, well, pretty tough.
Yeah, definitely.
Physically and spiritually.
Makes sense.
So how do you think Moses handled all that pressure?
Well, it's interesting because up until now, he's this hero, right?
The liberator.
Exactly. But now he has to be a leader in a completely different way.
Right.
Imagine keeping a whole group of people together.
Exhausted, hungry.
Yeah, facing constant uncertainty.
The encyclopedia mentions a lot of resistance.
Oh, yeah. The Israelites questioned his decisions.
They probably missed the comforts of Egypt, right?
I'm sure.
Even doubted Yahweh at times.
It's like even after this huge escape, the journey isn't over.
It makes you think about the challenges of freedom, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
Both for individuals and groups.
It's an uphill battle.
So how did Moses deal with all this?
Well, the source makes it clear he wasn't perfect.
He had doubts.
Oh yeah, anger, frustration, just like anyone would.
But he didn't give up.
No, he kept communicating with Yahweh, seeking guidance.
Trying to find solutions.
It sounds like leading a nation through a wilderness is no picnic.
Especially with a direct line to the Almighty.
Yeah, speaking of which,
His arrival at Mount Sinai.
right, the encyclopedia describes this really dramatic scene.
Fire and brimstone.
It really emphasizes the significance of what happens there.
Which is?
The 10 Commandments.
The Big Ten. Okay, for those of us who need a refresher.
Sure.
What exactly is a covenant in this context?
Basically, it's an agreement, a contract.
Okay.
But between Yahweh and the Israelites.
So it's not just any old contract.
No, it establishes a special relationship.
They're chosen with specific responsibilities.
Exactly, and Yahweh promises to protect them, following his laws, living by his teachings.
And the 10 Commandments are at the heart of it all.
That's right.
And their impact, I mean, wow.
Yeah, it's not just religion.
It's legal systems, ethical systems throughout history.
Right, think about the concepts they introduce.
Like what?
Sanctity of life, honesty, justice, no stealing, no murder.
It sounds basic now, but back then,
It was revolutionary.
it's incredible how these words on stone tablets could have such a lasting effect.
It really is. It shows how powerful ideas can be.
But it wasn't just the 10 Commandments, right?
No, Moses established a whole system of laws.
For the Israelites.
He set up judges, guidelines for how to live, rules for rituals.
It's like building a whole new society.
From the ground up.
So did it all go smoothly?
Where's the fun in that?
Right, of course not.
The journey to Canaan was full of challenges.
What kind of challenges?
Lack of food, water, internal conflicts, attacks from other tribes.
Sounds rough.
And through it all, Moses was constantly tested as a leader.
I bet.
Rebellions, doubts, accusations of abusing his power.
So even the guy who talked to a burning bush had his share of problems.
Exactly. And the source doesn't try to hide his flaws.
Like what?
He got angry, made mistakes, his frustration boiled over sometimes.
I guess that's human nature.
There's this one story about Moses hitting a rock to get water.
To get water.
Twice. And it's seen as a lack of faith.
What happened?
He was denied entry to Canaan.
Wait, so he led them through all this?
All that way.
And he couldn't even see the promised land.
It's a harsh consequence.
It really makes you think about leadership.
It's not just about personal glory.
Right.
It's about service, sacrifice, taking responsibility.
Even when things go wrong.
Even when you make mistakes.
So what happened to Moses then?
Did he just wander off into the desert? Well, he doesn't wander off, no.
So what happened?
He actually keeps leading them.
Really?
Yeah, almost to the very end. The source says his last act is to renew the covenant.
With the Israelites.
Right, reminds them of their obligations to Yahweh.
To keep their end of the bargain.
Yeah, the principles they should live by.
In the promised land?
It's like he's preparing them for a future without him.
Wow, that's powerful.
It is, yeah.
Knowing he won't be with them,
Right.
but still wanting them to succeed.
And then he climbs Mount Pisgah.
Mount Pisgah.
And from there, he can see the promised land.
The land he fought for.
A land he'll never enter.
And then what?
It disappears.
Disappears.
Yeah.
What do you mean, like vanishes?
The encyclopedia doesn't really say.
So we don't know what happened.
It says his death and burial place are a mystery.
Wow, I bet there are tons of theories about that.
Oh, I'm sure. All sorts of legends and interpretations.
But even without knowing how it happened, it's interesting that he doesn't make it to the promised land.
You're right, it raises some questions.
Like, was it punishment for his mistakes?
Some people think so.
Or maybe it's symbolic,
What's up?
that the journey matters more than the destination.
Interesting thought.
Moses brings them to the edge of the promised land.
But doesn't cross over himself.
Like his mission was complete.
That's one way to look at it.
And speaking of things that are open to interpretation,
What's that?
the whole question of whether Moses wrote the Pentateuch.
Ah, the first 5 books of the Bible?
Right. Traditionally, he's considered the author.
The traditional belief, yes.
But modern scholarship suggests it might be more complicated.
Yeah. Multiple authors, editors, over time.
So maybe Moses contributed,
Possibly.
but it wasn't a solo project.
That seems to be the consensus.
But his influence on the Torah, that's undeniable.
Absolutely. He shaped the foundation of Judaism.
Religious and ethical framework for a whole people.
And that impact is still felt today.
Across cultures, throughout history.
It's incredible
It really is.
to think about the impact one person can have.
We started with a baby in a basket,
Yeah?
then a reluctant leader facing down pharaohs,
Mhm.
a lawgiver, a prophet,
It's a story that still captivates us.
thousands of years later.
It speaks to something universal.
Courage, faith, leadership.
The struggle for freedom, for justice.
And that's what we want to leave you with today.
What's that?
As you think about Moses' story,
Yeah.
what resonates most with you?
Mhm.
What lessons can you take away from his experiences?
For your own life.
We encourage you to keep exploring, keep diving deep.
Into the story as Moses.
The history, the religion, the culture.
It's a journey worth taking.
And that's what the deep dive is all about.